The Shaw family got out of their house in 1985, leaving their car in the garage. The cops said the person had been left behind. No one ever thought to look behind the walls of the house for 9 years because it had a terrible secret. Then a new owner heard a sound that shouldn't have been possible. I want to thank you for watching before I start. Tell me in the comments where you're watching and what time it is there. Being here with us really means a lot. We're all in this together. Let me tell you what really happened. The fight had been building for weeks, a low, poisonous heat in the Shaw home that was otherwise happy. On a sunny Saturday afternoon in the spring of 1985, everything came to a head. Franklin Foster, Denise Shaw's bigger brother, was always the subject. He stood in their living room. He was a big, tall man who seemed to drain all the light from the room. His care for his sister and her family had turned into an unhealthy, controlling obsession a long time ago. Franklin said to Denise, "The world is a dangerous place." His voice was a low, loud rumble, very much for our people. You trust people too much. He's not tough enough. The kids need to be really and truly kept safe. High school music teacher Curtis Shaw stood his ground, even though his gentle personality was often seen as a sign of weakness. He had faith in the power of music and the good of his society when he was 36 years old. "Franklin, my family is safe here," he said in a strong voice. "You don't have to tell us how to live our lives. Please give us room." Denise wrung her hands together because she was stuck between the two guys. Even though she loved her brother, his anxiety and dark view of the world were making it hard for her to breathe. Their kids, Vanessa, 8, and Jerome, 12, had become quiet and would hide in their rooms when their uncle came over. The fight got worse. Franklin's ideas about safety were getting crazier, and what he was saying was scarier. He talked about making a safe place for them where no harm could come and he could watch over them. Curtis finally lost his cool and told Franklin to leave his house, telling him not to come back until he could respect their rules. This ended the fight. Franklin had already left, but not before giving Denise a look of deep, sadness, as if she were a fool for choosing to walk into a fire. He said in a whisper, "You'll see. Everyone will see. You'll thank me one day. Everyone who wasn't family saw them for the last time that day." The next week, there was no sound coming from the Shaw house. Denise usually gets the mail every day, but it started to pile up in their mailbox. Every morning, newspapers are brought with a familiar thud, but there were none on the front porch. Curtis didn't call to let anyone know that he was going to miss a high school jazz band practice. Denise didn't show up for her library volunteer job. Vanessa and Jerome didn't come to school on Monday. An angry neighbor was the one who finally called the cops. She had knocked on the door several times and looked in the windows, but all she saw was a house that looked like it had stopped moving. The nice sedan that belonged to the family was still parked in the garage. The cops found the house locked and with no signs of trouble when they got there. Once they got inside, they saw a scene of strange and normal silence. There was an unfinished game of checkers on the floor of the living room. The dishes were on the rack next to the sink to dry. The beds were made. There were no signs of a fight, not any blood, not a note. There were no signs of a quick exit. The 4-person Shaw family seemed to have vanished into thin air. The probe began, and Franklin Foster, who was the only close relative in town, was the first person they talked to. When he got to the scene, he gave off an air of serious, brotherly worry. He talked to the lead detective, Wallace Grimes, a white cop who was tired and painted a poisonous picture. He said that Curtis and Denise were having a lot of problems in their marriage and that Denise was sad and unstable. He made it sound like they had often thought about leaving their problems behind and starting over somewhere else, maybe on the West Coast. It was easy for Detective Grimes to see cases from the city's black areas through the lens of negative stereotypes. So Franklin's story was a welcome gift. It fit a neat, easy story that didn't take much work. Afterward, Grimes told a younger officer that it happened all the time. when they get fed up with the bills and fight, they just leave the mess behind. Every family member gives us a different story, but it's always the same. So the formal search was not very deep. A standard missing people alert was sent out, but the case didn't seem very important. Since a helpful family member said they left on their own and there was no proof of wrongdoing, the cops quickly scaled back their investigation. The strange absence of the Shaw family turned into a story about neglect and carelessness. It was easy to feel the systemic apathy. The absence of a black family wasn't seen as a crime that needed to be solved, but as a family matter that needed to be dealt with. The puzzle was solved not by finding the truth, but by making up a lie that made sense. And as the house on the quiet street started to slowly fall apart from lack of care, Franklin Foster could be seen standing across the street, just watching. His face was blank, so you couldn't tell how he was feeling. The Shaw family's old home was turned into a memorial to their silence. It was like a question mark on the block for the first year. Its yard got shabby over time, and the windows got dirty. People in the neighborhood would look at it with a hint of discomfort in their eyes, and then quickly move on. When people in the neighborhood called the cops to complain about the state of the property, they were told to talk to the bank because the owners had stopped paying the mortgage. The formal story had become the truth. The Shaws did not get hurt. They didn't take responsibility. They had left their life, their home, and their neighborhood. In the end, the bank took back the land. The legal notes stuck to the front door were like a final, official death notice for a family that had pretty much been erased. The house, which was now owned by the bank, was empty and stood out like a ghost on a busy street. Around here, it was first interesting, and then a bother. The paint came off, the porch sagged, and the yard gave into a mess of weeds and growing ivy. Teenagers dare each other to spend the night on the porch and tell ghost stories about the family that had just disappeared. Denise Shaw's separated brother, Franklin Foster, stayed in the background as a shadowy figure. The house he lived in was only a few miles away and was very clean. He didn't move. He was seen driving slowly past the old Shaw house every once in a while, his eyes fixed on the falling-apart building and his face blank. Few people remembered how he was related to the family, so his quiet vigil seemed like that of a family member who is mourning. No one would have guessed that it was a zookeeper keeping an eye on the quiet, secret cage he had worked so hard to build. He broke a few key supports in the crawl space and let water damage show up in obvious places so that the house would look structurally unsound from the outside. This was done to avoid any official inspections from the bank or the city during the foreclosure process. Any inspector would be afraid to go too deep into the falling-apart house. It seemed like time moved faster inside that cage. For the Shaw family, the 9 years that passed in the outside world were a never-ending, dull twilight. The seasons changed, politics changed, new songs came out, and technology improved. Their world had shrunk to the size of a small room with no windows or soundproofing that Franklin had quietly and obsessively built in their basement years before. He had called it a sanctuary. The night he locked them up was a blur of fear and confusion. He had made up a story about a chemical spill in the neighborhood and a deadly cloud to get their attention. He said he was there to lead them to a safe place. He had prepared for just such an event. He had led them into the secret room in the middle of the chaos and fear. They heard the heavy, soundproof door close behind them. The heavy locks locked them into the room and out of the world. Their lives turned into a dull pattern that he controlled. Food and water kept coming through a small, locked hole in the door at odd times. Their only light came from a single, empty bulb that was controlled from the outside. The only place to go to the bathroom was a simple toilet in the corner. They only knew about what was going on in the world through the small hole in the door, where Franklin would tell them stories. He told them that there was a terrible chemical war going on and that the air outside was poisonous. He also told them that he was their only security against the end of the world. Curtis, the kind music teacher, tried to keep them happy by planning their days so that they could teach the kids, tell stories, and sing songs quietly. Denise, the practical librarian, made sure they had enough food and met all of their needs with a fierce, protecting love. The months went by, though, and hope began to fade as the years went by. Jerome and Vanessa grew up in this dark, concrete home. Their understanding of the sky, the sun, and the feel of grass under their feet was becoming more and more like a dream. There was no violence in the crazy crime. Instead, the victim's mind was slowly and relentlessly broken down. Time, life, and reality itself were stolen. This was 9 years after the Shaw family went missing. In the fall of 1994, Regina Bailey, a motivated 30-year-old single mother, was looking for a new start. She could take care of herself and her young son because she worked as a medical transcriptionist, but her small room made her feel squished and short-term. She wanted a house with a yard where she could put down roots. She saw that the old Shaw house was being sold at a sale for foreclosure. The listing allowed that it was a wreck that needed a lot of work, though it was just a house, and the price was a lot less than anything else on the market. She thought she had to take the chance. When she won the bid, she felt both excited and scared at the same time. It was just an empty house, ready for someone to bring it back to life. She didn't know about its sad past. She felt a rush of hope as she signed the papers and got the old, worn-out keys. This would be their safe place to live. She had no idea that she was about to enter a nightmare from 9 years ago, or that the house she had just bought was very scary, already occupied. Regina Bailey worked hard for the first few weeks she lived in the old Shaw house. For years, she hadn't taken care of the house, but she was determined to make it a real home for herself and her young son. She ripped up stained carpets, scraped off peeling paint, and fought the garden that had turned into a jungle. She knew that the house was solid. It only needed love and a lot of work. She began to notice things as she spent more time inside, especially in the quiet hours after her son went to sleep. There were small, disturbing things that made her feel less safe. The sounds were the first thing. She told herself that old houses groan and creak. It was just the building shifting, and the pipes getting smaller as the nights got cooler. But the sounds she heard were not the same. They were not just random creaks of old wood. They had a rhythm and were almost like a design. There was a soft, weak tapping sound that came from inside the basement walls, a sound that she could only hear when there was no one else in the house. As she strained to listen, she would freeze, her heart racing. When the sound stopped, she would wonder if she had imagined it. It was also cold. Along the main wall of the basement, there was a piece of concrete block that didn't look right. The mortar on it was a slightly different color from the rest of the foundation. Even when it was warmer outside, this spot was always cold to the touch. It felt like the stone itself gave off a deep, artificial chill. When her son played down there, he whined about being cold and wouldn't go near it again. Regina thought it was just a draft caused by the base being old and not well insulated. The story got stranger. She felt very light drafts that didn't seem to come from anywhere. Late at night, she would sometimes hear what sounded like a muddled cry. It was such a weak sound that it could have been a cat in the neighbor's yard or the wind whistling through a loose window frame. But it always came from the basement, which was the same direction. She tried to make sense of everything. She lived alone with her kids in a brand new, big, scary old house. She was too tired and stressed, and her mind was playing tricks on her. She told herself that she was just being careful. The unease grew, and though a low-level hum of wrongness that she couldn't get rid of, there were no ghosts in the house. It seemed full. It felt like they were keeping a secret by pulling their breath in. It all changed on a Tuesday night in late October. Her rationalizations fell apart, and she was thrown into a terrifying new world. She should have been enjoying her 17th birthday with family and friends, but she wasn't. She was instead marking it in her jail, as she had done every year for 9 years. It was dark and quiet there. She started to sing as a small way to remember desperately and mark the end of a life she couldn't live. Sharon Bailey was getting ready for bed upstairs. The house was quiet, and her son was asleep. Then she heard it. It wasn't a wind, a tap, or a creak. The sound came from the basement and was a girl's voice. It was thin and weak, and the sound was so muffled that it was almost invisible. Regina stopped moving, and her heart stopped beating. Her whole body was stiff as she tried to listen. It sung, "Happy birthday to you, happy birthday to you." The sound was weak, warped, and terrible, but it was definitely a person singing a child's song. The sound shouldn't have been in her empty house. It was pure and total terror that hit Regina. All the scary stories and movies she had ever seen before this one were nothing compared to this real, frightening thing. There was someone in her walls, not just a ghost in her house. She moved away from the downstairs door and put her hand over her mouth to stop herself from screaming. Her first thought was to grab her son, run away into the night, and never come back. Then an even scarier thought came to mind. What if they were locked up? What if I had to help them? She could barely hold her phone because her hands were shaking so badly. She locked herself and her son in the bedroom while they were sleeping and called 911. When she talked to the dispatcher, her voice was a scared and choked whisper. She was able to say, "Someone is in my house. I believe they are stuck inside the basement wall." The dispatcher was suspicious at first because they get a lot of strange calls, but Regina's voice was filled with raw, real fear that could not be denied. "Ladies and gentlemen, please hold on as we send a unit." Regina was sitting on her bed with her son close to her and her eyes fixed on the locked bedroom door. In the cold, dark depths of the house, she could hear a girl softly singing "Happy Birthday" to herself. It was finally possible to hear the whispers in the wall. Regina Bailey felt both scared and incredibly relieved when the police cruiser pulled up. Its bright blue and red lights painted the quiet street in strange, frantic strokes. She met the 2 police officers at her front door. As she told them the impossible story about the voice in the wall, her voice was shaking. The officers looked at each other with a tired, skeptical look that could have been caused by a house shaking, a radio left on in a neighbor's basement, or an overactive mind. They had heard it all before. They did a normal tour of the house, but their bright flashlights cut through the places Regina was used to seeing in her new life that were now strange and scary to her because of her fear. There was nothing strange that they found. The weak sounds had stopped in the basement. There was only one cold spot on the wall. They were nice, but they didn't care about you. One of them told you, "Ma'am, we can't just break down your walls because we feel like it. Call us if you hear it again." But Regina was set on her goal. She insisted that it wasn't a feeling, and her voice got angrier as she spoke. It was a girl singing. "I remember what I heard. People must have been moved by her strong belief and refusal to give in." The police officers called their boss, who then decided to call the on-call detective after hearing the strange story. That cop's name was Michelle Grant. Detective Grant was a woman in her early 40s who was known for being very smart and having eyes that saw everything. She also had a reputation for being very interested in strange and forgotten things. She didn't brush off the story when she got to Regina's house after midnight and heard it. As Regina pointed out the strange part of the basement wall with the slightly different mortar and the unusual breeze, she listened carefully and looked there. "You have the original plans, right?" Grant the detective asked. Regina showed them off after finding them in the attic during her first clean-out. Grant threw the old broken paper all over the floor. The plans showed a strong base wall that didn't break. There was nowhere to put things or a place to hide them. They were looking at a fake wall. That was enough. For Detective Grant, action was necessary because of a structural oddity and a credible claim from a scared witness. She told one of the uniformed cops to get a sledgehammer from the trunk. When the choice was made to break through the wall, there was a lot of stress. Regina took a step back and held her son close in her arms. When the sledgehammer hit the concrete block for the first time, it made a terrible, frightening noise that could be heard throughout the house. The second, third, and fourth blows all made spiderweb-shaped cracks in the surface. Finally, with a fifth, strong blow, a piece of the block fell inwards, showing not the ground and foundation, but a dark, empty space inside. A wave of dirty, stagnant air, with the smell of soiled bodies, human waste, and deep sadness came out of the hole. One of the cops turned away and gagged because the smell was so strong. Officer Grant, her face filled with grim determination, shined her bright flashlight into the hole. The beam cut through the darkness and lit up a scene from a bad dream. In a small, secret room, people were huddled together on dirty mattresses. They were very skinny, and their skin was a strange shade of pale. Their eyes were wide open, blinking hard against the sudden, shocking light. A man, a woman, and 2 children. Or rather 2 children who are no longer children but are now teenagers, their bodies weak and their growth halted. It was the Shaw family. Not with relief, but with a deep, learned fear, they stared out. Vanessa, the young woman, let out a small, scared whimper. In an instant, her brother Jerome moved in front of his mother. Detective Grant said in a surprisingly soft voice, "It's okay." She pointed her flashlight at the floor so it wouldn't blind them. "We're the cops. We want to help you. Now you're safe." The rescue took a long time and was very careful. When the paramedics arrived, the normally quiet street turned into a big accident scene. The family was slowly led out of their prison, each covered in a blanket to protect their eyes from a world they hadn't seen in 9 years. They looked like ghosts blinking in the bright, foreign light of freedom. Their bodies and minds were twisted by a prison that was hard to understand. On the way to the ambulances where the Shaw family was waiting, the investigation into their 9-year tomb began. It was an unbelievably scary place. A single bare bulb gave light, and there was a basic toilet and a small sink in the corner. There were also shelves, with only a few cans of food and bottles of water. There are no windows, books, toys, or ways to connect with the outside world. This was all they had ever done for almost 10 years. The police department and the city were shocked by what they found. The cold case of the Shaw family running away was now being looked into as a horrible kidnapping and fake imprisonment case. Officer Grant knew this was only the start. We had to find the monster that built this cage and the man who had kept them there for 9 years. He was their only kidnapper and the only link to a world they were told no longer existed. She was also pretty sure she knew exactly where to begin her search. Along with Franklin Foster, Denise Shaw's worried but distant older brother. Getting the Shaw family out of the hidden tomb in their own basement caused a media frenzy and a police probe that was 1,000 times more serious than the one that happened in 1985. Detective Michelle Grant, who was now in charge of a full-fledged task team, focused all of her attention on Franklin Foster. Franklin was having a quiet life just a few miles away. He was in his early 50s. When police came to his spotlessly clean house, he greeted them with a calm, almost religious sense of worry. "My sister, Denise, they were found, right?" he asked, and his expression of surprise and relief was perfect. But when Detective Grant told him that they had been found alive in a secret room in their own house, he couldn't hide the anger that flashed in his eyes. It wasn't happiness. It was cold, jealous anger. Even though he denied everything, there was so much proof that the investigation knew where to look. The hidden room was built with an attention to detail that showed a skilled craftsman. Franklin was known to be a talented hobby carpenter. The building materials were found to have come from things he bought in the early 1980s. He lied to Detective Grimes in 1985, saying that the Shaws were having marriage problems and were planning to run away. This was now shown to be not just a worried relative's guess, but a deliberate lie that was a key part of his evil plan. The horrifying whole story was put together from the slow, painful testimony of the Shaw family, especially Curtis and Denise, as they started their long, hard road to recovery in a specialized medical center. The crazy crime was an act of controlling someone obsessively. Franklin Foster was crazy about the idea that the world was too dangerous for his sister and her family, so he chose to make his own perfect, safe place for them to live. Over the course of 2 years, he built this soundproof room in their basement while pretending to help them with home improvements. The night he caught them, he made up a story about a chemical spill that caused an emergency in the whole neighborhood and forced them into his safe place for their own safety. He was their only way to get in touch with the outside world for 9 years. He was also their god and judge. In exchange for giving them basic food, just enough to stay alive, he tortured their minds with a carefully thought-out lie. The world outside was destroyed by a deadly war, and he was the only one who could save them. He was in charge of their food, light, and even how they saw the world. When they were born, Jerome and Vanessa Shaw were 12 and 8 years old. Now they are 21 and 17 years old. They had forgotten everything they knew about the sun, the seasons, and other people. Vanessa, finally, miraculously, got through the soundproof walls and reached Regina Bailey when she sang Happy Birthday to herself on the night of her 17th birthday. It was a desperately quiet way for her to claim her presence. Franklin Foster was arrested while he was being tried. He didn't say sorry. His statement was a scary look into the mind of someone who was paranoid and had a terrible need to own everything. He really thought he was protecting his family, not locking them up. After being found guilty, he was told he would spend the rest of his life in a facility for the criminally crazy, which was like a locked room for the Shaw family. After that, there was a new kind of fighting. Even though they were free, they were badly hurt. In 1994, the world was full of scary new technologies, music, and social rules that made it hard to keep up. They had to learn how to live again, trust, and walk outside without being scared. They took a long time to get better physically, and it would take them a lifetime to get better mentally. After being saved, the Shaw family went through a hard and unstable year. They lived in a safe, secret place, away from the media frenzy that had broken out over their case, which people around the world found both horrifying and interesting. Their days were organized with therapy, medical checkups, and a long, painful process of getting used to a world that had moved on without them for 9 years. The world was a jumble of too many things for Jerome, who was 21 years old but had the social skills of a 12-year-old. It was always scary how many people were on one street because the cars were going too fast and the shops were too bright. He found peace in books, just like his mother had when they were prisoners. He loved reading about science and astronomy, which gave him a sense of the order in the universe and how it compared to the chaos in his own life. For Vanessa, who is now 17 years old, it was different. On her 9 birthdays, she had only had the dim glow of a bare light bulb as a candle. When she came back into the world, she did so with a quiet but fierce drive. She was incredibly interested in the sounds, colors, and styles of 1995. She learned about music other than the songs her dad had taught them. She couldn't stop drawing. She filled notebooks with pictures of the sun, trees, people, and other things she hadn't been allowed to see. But at night, the concrete walls, the metallic taste of canned food, and Franklin's words coming through the grate gave her bad dreams. Curtis and Denise, the parents, put all of their energy into helping their kids get better, even though they were also dealing with a very bad experience themselves. In the light, they had to learn how to be a family again. They had to find their way in a world where their own brother, who was real, had been revealed as their crazy jailer. It was painful to think about how unfair the police investigation in 1985 had been and how Detective Grimes's casual racism had helped Franklin's lie grow. Detective Michelle Grant apologized to them directly on behalf of the department. It was a small but important sign of a new era. Regina Bailey, the woman who heard the voices in the wall, was still an important part of their new lives. She was their first friend in this new world and helped them find their way. She brought them dinner, helped Vanessa choose new clothes, and just sat with them in quiet comfort, knowing that their house had been full of horrible things. Their lives were saved because she was brave and wouldn't give up on the impossible. A year after they were saved, the story ends on a sad and quiet note. She is 18 years old today. This time there will be no singing in a dark room. Regina and her son are in a public park with lots of sunlight. So are the Shaw family. Small cake with candles is sitting on a picnic blanket, moving in the light breeze. A book about stars is being shown to Regina's son by Jerome. While sitting on a bench, Curtis and Denise hold hands and turn their faces toward the sun. She is sitting on the grass with her sketchbook open. She's not drawing scary things or dark places. The scene in front of her is being drawn by her. Her family out in the open air, in the middle of a busy, beautiful and lively world. The lines in her picture are still a little shaky, but it's full of light. When she looks up, her mother sees her. Denise smiles in a way that is small, weak but real. In that shared look, a world of pain, surviving and love that lasts is sent. To fix them would take a lifetime of work. The 9 years that were taken away could never be given back. But this small, everyday thing, a birthday cake in a park with the sun on their faces, was a deep and quiet win. They were free. They were with each other. And for the first time in a long time, they were not stuck in the past and afraid of the future. Instead, they were ready to learn how to live again as survivors, scars and all.